Already? Right now? Oh my.
I'm going to go get some.
Lots of folks joining here at the last moment.
Hey everyone, welcome. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Give everyone a chance to get in the room. Okay, I think we will get started and people will continue to join us. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our bi-monthly Wednesday gathering. We are so happy to have you here. A blessed and reflective Ash Wednesday to those who observe, and happy Valentine's Day to those who observe. And we are thrilled today to welcome Rabbi Dr. Rachel Mikva, who we are going to help honor and celebrate her new book release entitled Interreligious Studies and Introduction. We're going to hear more about Dr. Mikva and her book shortly. Everyone should come in the room, a few just business items, and then I will let you know how the rest of the hour is going to play out together. Most of you should already be muted, and we ask that you stay that way until there is a time at the end where we will encourage you and ask you to participate. There will be a Q&A and an opportunity to engage with some of the students and Dr. Mikva around the topic of the day, the discussion, the book, etc. So as you're moving along, if you want to write in the chat, take notes for yourself, any questions you want to engage with later, please do so as we move through what promises to be very informative and I believe engaging conversation that we have ahead of us. So we usually start our Wednesday gatherings with something we call Words of Gathering. Today we're doing it a little bit differently. We're doing our spiritual grounding via a PowerPoint that is that Dr. Mikva is going to lead us through, which is going to be, I'll let Dr. Mikva talk more about it, but it is a poem by an Andalusian Jewish poet, but I'm going to let Rachel tell us more. So I pass it to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that? So Ibn Gabriel lived in the 11th century in Al-Andalus, the part of Spain that was under Islamic, in an Islamic milieu. It was considered la convivencia when Jews and Christians and Muslims all lived together, not always completely in peace, but in a really fertile intercultural exchange and where all of the communities could flourish. And he wrote this poem called Shacha Abakeshcha, At Dawn I Seek You. It is a love poem, which I thought would be appropriate for Valentine's Day, which I don't celebrate. But I do celebrate, or at least acknowledge, Tu B'Av, which is the Jewish Valentine's Day. It comes in the summertime. And a few years ago, on Tu B'Av, a band called Light in Babylon released a musical version of this poem. And the band is a really interesting one that I thought was just perfect for celebration of the Interreligious Studies book. They come from different cultures. There's an Israeli vocalist who's Iranian in her background, a Turkish santur player, a French oud player. They speak different languages, but they also have this common culture and language of music that brings them together. And so these words are theirs when they talk about, we hope the love carried in our music inspires healing. Let every human embrace the vision of a world full of diversity, freedom, peace, and light. So here's, for your spiritual reflection, the song and poem.
Nishma Thank you,
Emily?
Rabbi Mikva. Yep. So my name's Emily Vogt. I'm the academic dean at CTS. I'm so excited to be here today and to hear from Professor Rabbi Dr. Rachel Mikva, the Herman E. Schallman Professor in Jewish Studies at Chicago Theological Seminary, and to help her celebrate the publication of her latest book, Interreligious Studies, An Introduction. Professor Mikva has a rich and impressive background of scholarship, teaching, and activism, and all of these experiences have helped her to prepare for the work of writing this book. Her educational background is extremely impressive. She holds a bachelor's degree from Stanford University, a Master of Arts in Hebrew Letters, and a Doctor of Divinity from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and a PhD in Midrash, Scriptural Interpretation, and Rabbinic Literature from Jewish Theological Seminary. Rabbi Mikva began teaching at CTS in 2009. Many of you know the courses she's taught, but I'll list some of them here. Interreligious Engagement, Interpreting the Hebrew Bible 2, Dangerous Religious Ideas, Jewish Thought, Traditionally Rooted and Radically Engaged, Living, Breathing Judaisms, Living into Our Commitments, the study tour to Israel and Palestine, Women's Voices, Ruther, Lord, Plaskow, and Wadud, and others. For many years, she served at CTS as the director of our Center for Jewish, Christian, and Islamic Studies. In this role, she hosted lecture series and workshops, provided interfaith worship, education, and leadership, celebrated Jewish and Muslim festivals, offered intersectional anti-bias training, and led our community in how to best do interreligious engagement and activism. She then became the senior faculty fellow for JCIS's successor, the Interreligious Institute, where she provided leadership for many of the same sorts of activities at CTS. And she continues to work hard to lead us in these ways and to help us live into our commitment to interreligious engagement. You can see from the screen that's up, she has written many books. She wrote in 2020, Dangerous Religious Ideas, in 2012, Midrash, Vayosha, Translation, Annotation, and Commentary. We've got Broken Tablets from 1999, Restoring the Ten Commandments and Ourselves. And she has another book coming out called Monotheism and Pluralism. She's had all kinds of service commitments. She was the co-chair of AAR's Interreligious Interfaith Studies and on the steering committee for Sacred Texts and Ethics for many years. She was an associate editor for AAR's Reading Religion, on the editorial board of Feminist Studies in Religion books, on the board of advisors for the Journal of Interreligious Studies, on the board of trustees for the Council for Parliament of World Religions, and many, many more. She's written dozens of articles, reviews, and chapters, as well as numerous works for public audiences, and you should keep your eyes out this week for one of her op-eds in USA Today. We're so grateful for Professor Mikva's contributions to CTS and to the wider world, and for her taking the time today to talk about her book.
Thank you, Dr. Vo. We'll move into the reflection part of our program today. I'm Aisha Sapan, a PhD student here at CTS, one of Dr. Mikva's advisees, and also was a co-TA in her interreligious engagement course, her most recent course on the subject. So I'll begin with a few reflections of my own, and then some other students from the class will share theirs as well. In her Interreligious Studies, An Introduction, Dr. Mikva provides a comprehensive, concise, and critical resource that will likely serve as a classic in the field. In many respects, it is the first of its kind. Weaving together historical background, contextual examples, and her unique ability to distill central elements, Mikva gifts readers with an introduction that is at once accessible for new learners in interreligious studies, meticulous in its scholarship for graduate students looking to map the field, and deliberate in its organization and pedagogical function for educators. Encapsulating the dynamism, diversity, and complexity within the field, Mikva presents the following definition. The field of interreligious studies entails critical analysis of the dynamic encounters, historical and contemporary, intentional and unintentional, embodied and imagined, congenial and conflictual, of individuals and communities who orient around religion differently. It investigates the complex of personal, interpersonal, institutional, and societal implications. To further simplify and structure interreligious studies, Mikva outlines some of its key characteristics and goals. In doing so, Mikva urges practitioners and scholars to prioritize interdisciplinary approaches for fuller understanding, intersectional analysis to address humans in their full complexity, proclivities towards inclusivity that account for the complex nature of religious identity today, and relationality, or an awareness that interreligious learning occurs through relationship and through a level of intersubjectivity. Similarly, Mikva discerns various goals of interreligious fluency, tools for critical analysis, a dynamic link between theory and practice, and formation. Along these lines, Mikva gives us new language. Interreligious literacy is substituted for interreligious fluency, a term that seeks to capture the relational and communicative aspect of interreligious encounter. Life stance is adopted to encompass interspiritual, secular, and religious identity. The term interpath is offered as a compelling alternative to interreligious or interfaith. Finally, Mikva advocates for a differentiation between a pluralism that merely accepts or tolerates difference and what she calls parity pluralism, or a theology or worldview that sees multiple life stances as having equal merit, and that such multiplicity warrants appreciation and active engagement. The pages that follow invite readers to reflect and identify whether they might be a parity pluralist, and what teachings or principles within their respective life stance inspire them so. Mikva explores philosophical and ethical grounds for parity pluralism, notions of divinely intended difference, and teachings that emphasize interbeing or the natural world's inherent interconnectedness. Immediately, Mikva calls us upon this interpath that requires self-reflexivity, critique, and contemplation. Along these lines, Mikva's approach is far from apologetic. From the onset, she contends with colonial legacies within religious studies, Christian privilege within the interfaith movement in our institutions, and colonial violence within our U.S. context. For Mikva, this awareness as a starting point is critical for both practicing interreligious engagement and for embarking on a study of the field more generally. Our understanding of these realities is essential because, as Mikva reminds us, we encounter difference everywhere, in our families, in the workplace, in the media, online, in public schools, and in universities. Throughout each chapter, Mikva provides case summaries, shortened versions of interreligious case studies coupled with discussion questions. These pedagogical tools put one's interreligious problem-solving skills to the test and serve as an opportunity to cultivate empathy. Mikva believes that interreligious studies and engagement have potential for major impact and transformation. We must be intentional, critical, and open-hearted in our implementation of best practices. Interreligious engagement is most effective when we prioritize accountability to one another, relationships at the speed of trust, deep listening, and mutual hospitality. Each of these practices enhance our capacity for transformation, humility, and cohesion. Interreligious engagement shouldn't be about photo ops, one-time encounters, or merely learning about others. Instead, Mikva calls us to see an alternative paradigm that requires the formation of deep bonds to learn with rather than about others, and to be cognizant of power imbalances. As a call to decolonize knowledge, Mikva reminds us that interreligious engagement is about meeting people as human beings, bearing witness to their stories, and encountering one another intimately through spiritual encounter and ritual. In this vein, Mikva is attuned to experiential and affective elements of interreligious engagement. She devotes a chapter to the arts as a powerful interreligious medium that simultaneously uplifts marginalized and subaltern communities and calls us to increase our receptivity, curiosity, and imagination. Together, we have an opportunity to connect our hearts, to create new sacred space, and even advance justice in the world. Mikva's framing of interreligious studies both charges us with responsibility to dismantle harmful hatreds and systems of oppression, and equips us with the tools and knowledge necessary to imagine and build alternative futures for each other, our shared planet, and generations to come. After reading Mikva's book, I aspired to engage this interpath as part of my spiritual practice and as a way of action in the world. I'm reminded of my own faith of Islam and how we are guided to follow the straight path in the first surah or chapter in the Quran, Al-Fatiha, meaning the opening or she that opens. Through Mikva's inspiration, I now imagine this straight path as an interpath, in which my own spiritual journey is harmonious and interdependent with others. I imagine that this interpath provides merciful openings for solidarity, mutual care, and collective liberation. This interpath also opens wider my heart to the divine, to others, and to the sweet unknown. Thank you all for listening. We'll continue with more reflections. Gabriel, would you like to lead us?
Hi, everyone. Okay, first of all, I want to say that I love this book. And I believe that Rabbi Mikva has offered something significant and much needed in the world. And it isn't just that I think interreligious studies are imperative or that she has simply authored a clear, concise introduction to such an important field. It's my opinion that the book itself models a vital methodology and approach or orientation that transcends the ideological exclusivity and polarization that currently hinders our collective capacity to find a new way. A new way that doesn't end in social violence and environmental collapse. And from that methodology, there are two qualities in particular that I wanted to briefly highlight today: that of self-critical awareness or critical self-awareness and dialectic integrity. And I'll just quickly share that part of the lens that informs my relationship to this book is my personal identity as someone who is interspiritual to the core, who feels both at home with most of the world's religions, unable to separate my personal understanding and walk with the divine from each of these unique theologies. And yet I often also feel a sense of homelessness by not confessing any exclusive identity or having any sort of confessional community. And it can feel lonely at times and fraught as I wrestle with conceptual contradictions and paradoxical revelations. So this book really speaks to my heart, and I found it very encouraging. As there are times that I've asked God, why did you do this to me? Why did you make me this way? Am I okay? And I feel that this book welcomes me to the table and reassures me that I may be exactly where I need to be, even as who I am and what I believe is not a settled affair. So I'm not sure that there's a single place in this book where Rabbi Mikva shares a particular orientation within the vast field of interreligious studies without following it with several caveats or cautionary points for self-reflection. And this approach models a self-critical capacity for open and ongoing inquiry within ourselves and with each other, a call to vigilance and attention, an interrogation of our beliefs and the motives behind them, the ways in which shadows can stretch into even the brightest light. At many points throughout the book, I'd encounter this feeling of warmth and delight at being vindicated in my view. As many of us can attest, it just feels good to be right. But Rabbi Mikva would then point out the potential pitfalls woven into that view and some of the historical critiques of that view deserving consideration. And personally, I love it when a narrative clearly reflects the nuance and complexity of the human experience and the limits of our knowing. But in this capacity, I think such self-awareness is not only necessary for our arriving at our own authenticity and achieving peace with the greater human community, but this commitment to critical self-inquiry inevitably fosters humility, which drives us to seek the voice of the other, so we can see that which was not previously encompassed in our own vision. I'm not sure the world really needs more people arguing truth claims without truly looking at themselves or listening to others. Which brings me to that second quality modeled so skillfully in this book, dialectic integrity. There are plenty of books in academia that argue assertions and cultivate different voices with the intention of bolstering those assertions. Rabbi Mikva doesn't do that. Granted, it is an introductory text to an immense landscape, and so such a survey demands the inclusion of different historical voices and their place in the greater field of study. But something exciting happens here, for those voices aren't woven into some concluded historicity. There's never a hint of resolution. There's never a hint of resolution. Many perspectives are shared. We are led into historical conversations, exchanges, points of contact that are ongoing. They live into the present, and they'll continue into the future. And so the book catches us up with decades of interreligious thought and then turns it over to each of us to continue that dialogue. We are left with many challenges, many unanswered questions, and some degree of curiosity, depending on the reader, to pursue those voices previously unencountered that can widen one's own perspective while also clarifying one's own truth, as I said before. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Maureen, would you like to lead us next?
Well, some of this is going to sound a little redundant at this point, but my name is Maureen. As a journalist on a self-imposed timeout, I'm here to give a slightly less academic perspective, instead focusing on representing what I believe I was called during the admissions process, the more experienced student who is on a journey of spiritual discernment. I was born and raised Catholic, kindergarten through Jesuit University Catholic schools, but only recently discovered that I am a nun, not N-U-N, but N-O-N-E. Pew Research recently released a study about Americans and religion, and I was listening to NPR one day and I thought, oh, this ties beautifully into our interreligious studies, the class, the book, the assignments. This research study came out with roughly 28% of Americans now identify as nuns, atheist, agnostic, philosophical versus religious stance, those who are unsure altogether, or those still identifying with the faith they were raised with, but no longer committed or necessarily aligned with a specific religion. That would be me. But that's only me in the last few years. I am and always will be a practicing Christian, but much like Gabriel, and who I had the great privilege of being in our weekly group with, much of our conversation was like, I listen to all. I feel closer to a higher power when I see how other people practice and how other people go about it, their traditions, songs and prayers. And just listening to Dr. Mikva's song at the beginning, I thought, oh, I'm going to write this down. That's beautiful. I would love to bring that into my world. And I felt that this book gave everybody an opportunity to enter into the conversation. Since stepping aside from the Catholic Church, I've been searching for a way to define my faith, this new freedom in my spirituality that is no longer confined to a very specific religion. And there are two chapters that I wanted to highlight that created and cultivated real change during the course of this class in my language and my purpose professionally and personally. Chapter 4, the ethical, philosophical, and theological grounds of parity pluralism, which Aisha spoke about. But in that specific week, we were tasked with critically thinking about our own internal framework, the language, the essence of where our interfaith stance is, where it comes from, what drives it, and discovering, despite 50 years of going to Catholic Mass, that my calling to parity pluralism is deeply rooted in an ethical foundation. And the quote that really spoke to me the moment that I read it was, pluralists realize that religious understanding is necessary to prevent human beings from killing each other based on differences of belief or practice. And for someone who's traveled around the world and had the privilege and the opportunity to see conflict that has come out of religious difference, or that has been labeled as conflict with religious difference, which often it isn't, it's cultural or it is historical, but it gets that label. whether it's 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or a couple of months ago, I really felt that this is what spoke to me. And that was why the book was so revelatory to me. And that this isn't particularly a revelatory thought, but it was the way in which Dr. Mikva, as both Aisha and Gabriel pointed out, she gives you the history, and then she says, and here's interpretation that now invites everyone to be a part of the conversation. That particular definition helps me to create language to articulate purpose in a way that made the exploration of other not only okay, but it insisted that I do it in order to remain authentic, to find the authentic spiritual interpath voice that is in me. It also gave me a framework and a better understanding for the other foundations, one of which, had I not read through this book and been in this class and had these incredible conversations, I might have said or defaulted to one of the other foundations as someone who spent a lifelong devotion to a particular religion. It's, as I said, it's not that this was revelatory, it was the premise and the language and the way that it was organized that gave me an organization and a new framework to look through it. What was revelatory for me was chapter 9, Practices of Interreligious Engagement. Dr. Mikva circles back to the word interpath, which Aisha mentioned. She initially brings it up in chapter 2, but on page 213, and you just have to indulge me as I quote this, interpath is a word coined in the dialogue world to be more inclusive of people who come to the table with secular, cultural, or philosophical perspectives, as well as individuals who identify as interspiritual or spiritual but not religious. I felt myself saying, oh, that's me. That's me. That's people I'm in this class with. Engagement tries to capture the deliberateness of the encounter, meeting across difference, and here's the key words, for purpose. Still, it is helpful to begin thinking about dialogue, which intimates something more substantial than mere conversation. At that moment, I felt like that's what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to have conversation, but the word wasn't right. It was engagement. And without the words and the direction and the language that exists in this book, I don't think I would be graduating from CTS with a feeling of the driven purpose that I have now. It was there, it was kind of floating around. I did Dangerous Religious Ideas, loved it. I was a Mikva stalker from that book on. She's done half my classes, but this was the class that I said, this is the reason I went to CTS. This is the reason I put a hold on my career, so I could find new language to bring it back into the career that I loved, but I felt like I was missing something. So I just want to conclude by, as I read any of our books or articles, I read it. My teenagers have taught me that there's a very easy way. Instead of writing all your notes, you voice type them on your phone, and then you can type your words right after, and you string it all together, and it makes writing your assignment that week so much easier. So I was looking back at my notes this week, and this is what I wrote right after I read page 213. Perhaps no other chapter of no other book or reading or article or video or lecture at CTS has resonated with me more than chapter 9, page 213. Dissecting, defining, and setting parameters for the kind of dialogue that I have longed to engage with each and every time I have returned from covering a war, spending time in a refugee camp, and every other kind of conflict I've covered in my professional life or engaged with in my personal life or internally as a spiritual person. So while I may not have gone to CTS to be an ordained minister or an academic, I truly feel this book gave me deep guidance and, more importantly, momentum to create more purposeful conversation, engaged dialogue, if you will, as a writer, a speaker, a spiritual being, and as a human being. And I'm so grateful that I both wish it was my first class at CTS, and I'm so deeply grateful that it was my last class, although she may be responsible for Tina Shelton having a nervous breakdown with me continually asking her, what if I take another certificate program? How many other classes do I have to take? Can I keep going? So thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and I'm grateful for the time in this class in particular. It kind of coalesced purpose and drive.
Thank you, Maureen. Dr. Mikva, I'll turn it to you for a response.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you to everybody who's here. I'm delighted to see you and deeply grateful that you would take some time first to gather together, but also to celebrate this book. And the second thing I'll say is I'm not easily embarrassed, but I'm very embarrassed. So that's a testament to the grace and beauty of the words, beginning with Dean Vogt's introduction of my bio, and then Aisha's words and Gabriel's words and Maureen's words. The book couldn't possibly be as good as you describe it, but I'm deeply moved by your reflections, and they reflect not only on me and the book in ways that embarrass me, but also on you in ways that should make you proud. They demonstrate the deep thought and reflection that you've brought to all your work that I've seen, and to so many of the things that you do in your life. So thank you for all of that. I thought I might just share a little bit about how the book came to be. As Dean Vogt indicated, I've been trying to work at interreligious engagement and advance our commitments from the time I arrived here. And I had early in my stable of courses, an interreligious engagement course. The first iteration I actually co-taught with Susan Thistlethwaite and Najiba Saeed. And we struggled mightily to find the kinds of materials we wanted to give students to read and engage with. And in every iteration of the course after that, I continued to struggle. It's a relatively new field. There are some great contributions. In fact, one of my colleagues on the steering committee of the Interreligious and Interfaith Studies program unit at the American Academy of Religion, Hans Gustafsson, is here today. I'm grateful for him, for his appearance here, but also for the work that he's done. He just published another book in the field, which could also be seen as a kind of a textbook with a very different approach. Anyways, there's work coming out every day, but it was just so hard to synthesize and to help the students synthesize everything that I wanted them to be thinking about, because I wanted them to get language and concepts for the field. I also wanted them to be able to explore, and this is the second section of the book, and it's actually my favorite section. It's all of the ways in which we encounter religious difference without even trying, right? It's not our programming and our creation of dialogues or study programs, et cetera. We just keep bumping into each other in families, on campuses, in congregations, in the public square, in the media. And I really wanted us to think deeply about what kinds of encounters happen there and what is that impact on how we all understand one another. And how can we think about it in way and engage in it in ways that might improve its capacity to advance understanding. And then the third section of the book, I also wanted students to begin to think, not everybody's going to go out and be an interreligious leader, but there are, in ways large and small, opportunities for us to design things that would bring us together, whether they be intercongregational dialogues or art programs, or social justice work that we can do together. How do we invest that in ways? How does that advance interreligious understanding, and how might we be agents of that? And so I wanted students to get all of that in a single semester course. So of course I had to write the book. So that's how the book came about.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mikva, for sharing some of that background. We'll begin now with the Q&A section. I think I'll take the liberty to ask the first question. So you mentioned that you wrote this book mainly because you were looking for something to teach with. And you did have the opportunity to teach this book. So wanting to hear a little bit about how that experience was like.
Well, first it's embarrassing because, I am not going to get rich on the royalties for everybody who bought the book. But I was really delighted that Yasmin Abou-El-Khir, the director of our Learning Commons, made it available to students electronically. So they didn't have to buy it. So you could just read it online and download the chapters. So that eliminated that source of embarrassment a little bit, or at least alleviated it. But it was actually great fun. I was concerned about a couple things. One is, well, I didn't want students to be afraid to argue with me, right? To argue with the book. And of course, we were reading other things and bringing other things into conversation with it. But I worry that that it might make them slightly less forthcoming anyway. I might not make them any less critical, but less forthcoming in their criticism of what they're reading to think about it critically. But I felt that students did a really good job of engaging with the ideas critically, which is the whole point, right? It's not about whether or not you think X or Y is a good book. It's about what can you learn and how do you want to problematize some of what you learn. And I thought students did great work with it. I really was so powerfully assisted by Aisha as a TA and also Rebecca Blackburn, who is a TA. We had a lot of students, and one of my other concerns about teaching my own book is it's too much of my voice. And so it was really helpful just to have two other voices reading student work and responding to it. But it wasn't just any two voices. I mean, Aisha and Rebecca's contributions, they modeled really just a remarkable capacity to respond substantively to students in ways that deepen their thinking. And so, in both of the things, all the things I was worried about seemed to have resolutions. And so it was really a great fun for me anyway. I can't tell you how the students felt.
Looks like we have a question from John. Go ahead.
Hello, Dr. Mikva, and thank you for such a wonderful book. In chapter 9, page 220, you write, a theist may believe that one must believe in God to be an ethical person, for example. Then they meet an ethical atheist. Would you suggest ways to engage with secular organizations and potential interreligious project partners?
Sure. We actually, our Lecoq lecture coming up on March 14th brings together President Brad Braxton with Dr. Anthony Pinn, who's one of really the most prominent and brilliant African-American secular humanist intellectuals. They wrote a book together called A Master Class in Being Human, which, as you know, being in the course, I asked students to read part of. For the first time, our Interreligious Institute is going to formally reach out to the Secular Humanist Society in Chicago. Kim, what's it called exactly? Society for?
Yep, hang on, I'll get it. Can't think of it.
Okay, to participate and to encourage their members to come, to be in conversation, and it hopefully will be the foundation for a partnership. One of the interesting challenges of reaching out and being more inclusive of the spiritual but not religious and the nuns, and even folks who would identify themselves as secular humanists, is they're not all in familiar organizations, right? We can't, there are some, like this society that we are inviting to partner with us. A lot of it isn't in organized things that look like congregations, right? So we have to think more creatively about how to do the outreach. We often find these voices and these partners in social justice work. And I think that when we try to give some interpath substance to our interpath social justice work, that we need to make sure that our language, our questions, etc., are inclusive of people who orient around religion from a more secular or humanist perspective. So those are some of the things sort of rattling around in my head as ways that we can visibilize this critical community within our own interreligious efforts. Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago. Thank you, Kim.
Other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat as well. And Maureen and Gabriel too, if you have questions, feel free to ask.
I do have a question, but I want to give someone else an opportunity to ask if they've got something burning. I will just ask a question. I'm just curious. I remember towards the end of the book, you spoke a little bit about the difference between conflict resolution and conflict transformation, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to just say a little bit about that, the differences, and anything at all that comes to mind, just given these days of conflict that we're in.
Sure. I talk about conflict not because it's always the center of meeting across religious difference, but it is a part of meeting across religious difference, and therefore we need to be as self-critical and as self-aware about this as we are about the other dimensions of encounter. So the conflict transformation language that I utilize tries to make a distinction. Well, first tries to recognize that conflict is normal, right? Conflict is just disagreements about things that matter, right? About differences that matter, right? Some differences don't cause us conflict, but other ones do. So conflict's a normal part of human life. And sometimes when we talk about conflict resolution and we resolve it and we make the conflict go away, we are in fact iterating, re-embedding the power structures that existed that created the injustices that caused the conflict, right? A lot of times making a conflict just go away and resolving it just leaves those power structures undisturbed. And those who are able to, start a ruckus just run out of gas or are temporarily pacified or are put down, right? And the conflict goes away. Conflict transformation suggests that that's not what we're after, right? We're after actually trying to figure out what is at the cause of the conflict, what is it that the diverse participants and stakeholders in the conflict are hoping to change or not change. And how can we together work as problem solvers to create change that would transform all of us? When we talk about conflict resolution rather than conflict transformation, often still the conflict doesn't actually go away. It just gets submerged. Conflict transformation is trying to achieve something more lasting that really does transform the way we interact with one another. And there's some brilliant experts in this field. I don't claim to be, but I just thought it should be included in the book.
There's a question from Sarah Ruth here in the chat, wondering if you experience any pushback on the book, given the welcome to variety of life stance it provides and which conflicts with some belief systems.
I'm sure that somebody reads the book and it's too broad, right? It's too embracing. The chapter that talks about theological parity, about parity pluralism, tries to make a distinction and say you can do interreligious work, you can do constructive and productive interreligious work without being a parity pluralist, right? Pluralism in a broader understanding is just, excuse me, I'm over COVID, but not completely. What was I saying? Pluralism is just the active engagement across religious difference, right? Religious pluralism. So one does not have to be a parity pluralist. One doesn't have to assert the equal value of multiple spiritual life stances and value the diversity of them in the world. The reason that the chapter exists is for those people who kind of want to go there, to give them tools for how to articulate it and ground it in their worldview. So it's explicit that you don't have to be a parity pluralist. Nonetheless, by insisting that that it be as embracing of the nuns, of the interspiritual folks, of of encouraging people to find out how someone else sees themselves and respect that self-definition. I'm sure there are people who've read it and thought, nah, or at least not for me, right? This is not my worldview. This is not what I think about religious difference. They just haven't contacted me.
Dr. Mikva, may I ask you this, with tremendous gratitude for what you have given us, not only today, but in the book itself. You move so fluidly between and among various sites and identities in your career, a public commentator, engaging the media, opinion editorials on many different stages, your work in congregations, your work in the academy, and then, of course, your own family configurations. Can you comment a little bit about how those multiple sites influenced you in writing this book? Because often as scholars, we are taught to bracket those things, right? We're not supposed to talk about the things that actually influence us, at least not openly. I'm just curious how your fluidity of moving between and among these spaces has influenced this text.
Thank you for that question. I do feel we are supposed to, as scholars, cite our influences, but there's supposed to be some sort of intellectual purity of a linear history of ideas. And my brain doesn't work that way. Even when I talk about scholarship, I use Wendy Doniger's idea of a toolbox, right? I use different methodologies that, whatever lens is going to show me what I find to be most useful is the lens that I'll point at something. But, it certainly plays into the ways all of my identities and activities shape my voice. I'm deeply impacted by my work in the congregational rabbinate. I was a congregational rabbi for 13 years. And one of the things I felt about that world, as wonderful and deep and as transformative as it was for me, was my vision was just a little too narrow, so deeply embedded and focused in Jewish communal life. And I really was looking for a broader horizon. And my doctoral studies began to open that, and then CTS just exploded that and gave me so many resources, avenues, contacts, mentors, colleagues, who activists who shaped my worldview and taught me so many things that I just didn't see before. And every time I see something new, I think Mo was talking about this, like you read it and you go, aha, oh wait, now I have language and a new way of thinking about it, and right, it changes everything sometimes. And it comes not only out of a book, but even more so out of the people we meet.
Mo, I see your hand raised as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a fully cogent thought, but Dr. Mikva, my interest since my time at CTS has really started to focus in on kids. And it's kind of a touchy area. My Shulman Award proposal was a teen advocacy interreligious interpath group, and that I had originally was conceiving of it with my daughter, who has this incredible group of multicultural, multinational friends. And then when everything with the war started in Israel, I was like, we can't touch that. But then she came back and said, I wish we'd done it. And so my question is, in general, in the MDiv universe and at a seminary where people are being ordained to go back and be ministers, what age, what time, when can we start bringing this conversation to our youth? Because as adults, we're both trying to fix mistakes of the past and bring new language in to move forward. But I'm very much interested in giving that language to younger people, because they're going to have more time on the planet and they're going to have more. I would like to see it incorporated into language in all the same ways that you talk about in the book: respecting your own tradition, honoring your own tradition, no threat to your own tradition, but engaging with young people younger so that it's woven into the conversation, especially in a place, like the United States. We have an election coming up, and, as somebody in the media, where you could not say G-O-D, you could not use religion or the word God forever. And then all of a sudden, a couple of elections ago, it was taken and spun around. I would love to find a way to start having ministers in their congregations, maybe not teachers, that's a little too modern for some people, but to bring this language into younger people.
Well, there are certainly efforts out there. One of them was originally called Poetry Pals and brought students together across schools of different religious orientation, so religious schools, private schools, to write and share poetry together. It's expanded a little bit, still does the inter-school connection, but using the arts more broadly. There are lots of one-off projects that use the arts. It's a great medium, especially for kids. There are efforts to figure out how to safely build in interreligious literacy and respect into public school curricula. There are a lot of concerns about this and the abuses that it invites, certainly in certain kinds of contexts. But then the understanding that for a society that's so religiously diverse, our young people need language, they need values, they need principles, and they need experiences of encounter across difference, and to practice those skills with one another before they become adults. We need to start this early. I recognize it's 1 o'clock. There's a lot more to say about that great question, but I'm going to respect our time and turn it to whoever closes this out.
I will. Aisha, did you want to say something before? Were you about to speak? Okay. Thank you so much, Rabbi Dr. Mikva, and all of our respondents. What an amazing conversation, a Wednesday gathering. We are so excited for this work. I'm excited for my partnership with you personally, Dr. Mikva, and all that you bring to CTS. And we're so lucky to have you, clearly, as we hope was demonstrated here today. And we're very excited about the book.
Thank you.
I know we are at time. I did put in the chat the aforementioned LeCoq lecture, which is coming up on March 14th, in which our own Dr. Braxton and Dr. Anthony Pinn will be in conversation. And I think a lot of folks in this room might find that very interesting. So we hope that you will register. Please do that and join us on March 14th. And it will be a hybrid event, and it will be followed by an interfaith iftar. If those of you who are in Chicago and can join us in person, the event starts at 5:30, ends at sundown, at which point we will break a fast and prayer for our Muslim siblings and then enjoy an iftar together. So we hope that you will join us for that. Are there any other announcements in brief for the group before we break 2 minutes late? Okay, congratulations once again, and thanks all for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a great day.